Stop that digging right now. It's illegal. That's what the HOA Karen, Darlene, yelled at me. She called the police on me, even though I was just digging a hole for a new fence post on my own ranch. I was doing a simple repair on my own land, but she made it into a huge neighborhood problem. She didn't know what she was getting into. Just 5 minutes later, things started to change in a big way. It shows that when you bother the wrong person on their family's land and think your power means you can do anything, life has a funny way of teaching you a lesson. And what became of her $4 million mansion? That's the part of the story you won't want to miss. Let me know in the comments where you are watching this story from. It was a Saturday morning around 6 a.m. I was on my porch, enjoying my first coffee of the day and looking at the land my father had passed down to me. The air was cool, and I could see my own breath as I thought about the day's work. It was a simple job. I needed to replace about 50 feet of an old fence that termites had been eating away at for the last year. I had been delaying it, but the fence posts were beginning to tilt. I knew a strong storm could easily blow that whole part of the fence over to my dad always used to tell me. Son, there are two kinds of problems in this world. The ones you deal with now, and the ones that deal with you later. He was a man who did things the proper way. He believed in following the rules, being patient, and showing respect for the law. Justice is found by following the system, not by using your fists. He would say to me when I was a frustrated kid. Looking back, I didn't realize how important his words would be in the coming week that I started my small Kubota excavator at about 7:30 in the morning and began digging the first post hole. The work was simple and step by step. Dig 3 feet down, put the post in, fill the hole with concrete, and then move to the next one. I had been working for about 2 hours and was taking a water break by my Ford pickup truck when I saw her. She was walking across my property as if she owned it. This was Darlene Hartwell, a 52-year-old woman who was the president of our homeowners association. She owned the 8,000 square foot mansion next to my small ranch house. Her huge home looked like a cruise ship docked next to a little fishing boat. She came over wearing a pink silk robe and expensive Louis Vuitton slippers. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, glowing in the morning light. "Excuse me," she said, her voice filled with the kind of attitude wealthy people use when they are about to talk down to someone they think is beneath them. "You are breaking HOA Rule 4.2b, which is about keeping the neighborhood looking nice. I am the president of this homeowners association. I am the law around here." I put down my water bottle and walked over to her. I kept my voice calm and polite. "Good morning, Darlene. I'm just putting in some new fence posts on my own property line. Everything I'm doing is inside my own boundaries, and I have all the right permits." But Darlene didn't care about permits or property lines. She pointed a finger toward her mansion, with its shiny marble pillars and a sparkling infinity pool surrounded by perfectly kept gardens. Those gardens probably cost more to take care of than what most people earn in a whole year. "Any building work that can be seen from my property has to be approved first by the Building Review Committee," she stated. "You were supposed to give us your plans, reports on how this affects the environment, and papers showing that your work matches the look of the neighborhood." I took out my phone and showed her the official county map of the land. I pointed to the clear lines that marked my property. "These fence posts are 15 feet inside my property line, Darlene," I explained. "I don't need the HOA's permission to fix my own fence." Her face turned red with anger, and right then, I knew this argument was about to get ugly. What I didn't realize at that moment was the real reason she was so angry. You see, this land once belonged to her family. 10 years ago, her husband Gary's construction business went bankrupt. They had to sell their 50-acre ranch to my father for $800,000. It was a quick sale for much less than it was worth because they desperately needed the money. Now, Gary had rebuilt his business, and they were rich again. But Darlene had never accepted losing what she felt was her family's land. Since I inherited the property, she had asked me twice to sell it back to her. Both times, I had politely said no. This wasn't really about a fence. It was about her wanting control and trying to get back what she believed was hers. "You listen to me, young man," she said, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the sheriff's department right now. You're using dangerous machinery without permission, and I feel threatened by how aggressive you're being." I couldn't believe my ears. "Aggressive behavior, Darlene? I'm just digging holes on my own property." But she was already dialing 911. I could hear her voice change, becoming overly dramatic and shaky. Yes, I need help immediately. I have a neighbor with dangerous equipment who is threatening me with violence. I feel unsafe in my own home. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Martinez arrived in his patrol car. I had met him a few times in town. He was a good man who had been a cop for 20 years, dealing with all sorts of problems, from drunk drivers to family fights. He was in his late 40s, with some gray in his hair, and had the tired look of someone who has seen too much foolishness from people. "Morning, Art," he said as he got out of his car. "I got a call about a disturbance over here." I showed him my property deed, the county map, and the building permits I had gotten 2 weeks before. Sheriff Martinez looked over the documents carefully. Then, he walked along the fence line himself, measuring to check it against the map. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, turning to Darlene, "everything here seems to be correct. Mr. Thompson is working, completely within his property lines, and has all the needed permits." But instead of giving up, Darlene insisted on her story. "Officer, he's been hostile and threatening. Just because he has papers doesn't give him the right to scare the neighborhood." Sheriff Martinez glanced at me with a look that said he had seen this kind of thing many times before. "Not my first time dealing with an HOA problem," he mumbled quietly. "This is where things took a turn that still makes my blood boil. Even though I was completely in the right, with every legal paper and permit I needed, Sheriff Martinez had to follow the county rules for disputes between neighbors. Art, I'm going to have to ask you to stop working for now while we do a full review. County rules require a 24 to 48-hour break for property line arguments." He took the keys to my excavator and gave me a formal warning ticket. "I know this is frustrating, son, but I have to follow the rules." Darlene's smile was one of pure victory as she watched the sheriff drive off with my keys in his pocket. There I was, standing in my own yard, holding a piece of paper that stopped me from working on my own land, all because my neighbor had a temper tantrum. "You should learn to be more cooperative with your community," she said, fixing her silk robe. "This neighborhood has standards, and I plan to keep them that way." I looked her directly in the eyes, and for the first time since this whole trouble began, I felt a change inside me. My dad's voice came back to me. "Sometimes, son, the system takes a while to work, but when it does, it works all the way." "I'll remember your face, Darlene," I said in a low voice. "And you'll remember mine, too." The way her smile faded a little let me know she heard something in my tone she wasn't expecting. It was something that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had chosen the wrong neighbor to fight with. What was Art planning to do with that threat? Leave a comment below if you think Art should keep fighting or just sell the land and leave. Let me know what you would have done. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, I was in my kitchen, looking at the warning ticket and trying to decide my next step. That's when I heard a knock at my door. It was my neighbor, Linda, a sweet, elderly Vietnamese woman who had lived a couple of houses away for the last 20 years. In her weathered hands, she held a USB drive. Her usual kind smile was gone, replaced by a look of firm resolve. "Art," she said. "I recorded everything from my kitchen window this morning. That woman, she lied to the police." Linda had moved to America in 1995 with only her life savings and a strong will to create a better future for her family. She bought her small house with cash and worked 2 jobs to pay it off quickly. She had always been thankful for the chances this country had given her. In return, I had helped her with electrical work for years without charging her, because that's what good neighbors do for one another. "Good people should be stood up for," she said, placing the USB drive in my hand. The video she recorded was perfectly clear. It was filmed from her kitchen window and had a great view of my property line. Most importantly, it had clear audio. You could hear every lie Darlene told, every dramatic exaggeration, and every false accusation about feeling threatened. Point 2. Hours later, I was at the sheriff's department with a large envelope filled with proof. The video, my property deed, the 2020 county map, and the building permits I had pulled. Sheriff Martinez watched the video twice. I saw his jaw clench as he listened to Darlene's made-up story about feeling unsafe. Martinez had seen this exact situation play out many times in his 20-year career. Wealthy people would use the police like their own private security, making false reports against neighbors they wanted to push around or get rid of. The story was always the same. Fake safety issues, over-the-top threats, and just enough connections in the local government to make his job difficult. even when the law was on the other side. He had seen good people forced out of their homes by these kinds of harassment campaigns, having to sell and leave because they couldn't afford expensive court fights against neighbors with endless money. But this case felt different. Art wasn't giving up. He wasn't looking for the easy way out. And Martinez found himself hoping that this young man would find a way to get back at his entitled bully. "Son, I've been a cop for 2 decades, and I can spot a setup from a mile away," Martinez said. "The trouble is, county rules still make me follow procedure. I can't just change my mind because of new proof without going through the official process." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead as if trying to get rid of a headache. "Here's what I can tell you off the record. That lady has friends at City Hall. This won't be the last of your problems. Give me until tomorrow morning to get this through the system, and in the meantime, try to lay low." As I drove home, I had a strong feeling that Darlene wouldn't wait until the next morning to make her next move. I was right. By 3 p.m., Darlene was on her phone, acting like a campaign manager on election day. She called a city councilman she knew from the country club. She called the county's head of planning, whose sister just so happened to be her HOA's lawyer. She even called the local newspaper, telling them a story about a threat to community safety and property values. Her plan was simple: make me look like a dangerous neighbor who was ruining the peaceful, upscale lifestyle everyone else had paid so much for. Within an hour, every single one of the 47 homeowners in our association got an email with the subject line: "Emergency Safety Alert. Violent Neighbor Threatens Residents." When I got back to my driveway at 4:30 p.m., I knew right away something was wrong. A fresh pile of construction trash was dumped right in front of my garage. There was broken concrete with sharp, rusty rebar sticking out, paint cans leaking, smelly chemicals, and rotting drywall that stank of mold. It would cost me at least $500 to get this mess cleaned up properly, and that's if I could even find a company willing to deal with dangerous materials on such short notice. But the trash wasn't even the worst part. My brand new security cameras, the ones I had put up just last month after a few break-ins in the area, were covered in thick, black spray paint. The motion sensors were broken, and a note was taped to my front door. It read, "Get the message." Yet, in Darlene's perfect, neat handwriting, this wasn't just a simple act of revenge. This was a declaration of war. And it seemed she had fired the first shot while I was at the sheriff's office, trying to do things the right way. By 6 p.m., her campaign to turn the neighborhood against me was already working. Tom Wilson, who lived 3 houses away, called to cancel the electrical work I was scheduled to do for him the next day. "Sorry, Art, but my wife doesn't want any trouble with the HOA. You know how it is." No, I didn't know how it was. But I thanked him for the call and mentally subtracted another $300 from my weekly earnings. 20 minutes after that, I was walking to my mailbox when Linda Hayes, the neighbor who usually waved to me on her evening walks, suddenly became very interested in her shoes and rushed by without looking at me. That's when I found the first official HOA violation notice in my mailbox. It said, "Violation, unsightly material storage, breaking community aesthetic rules. Fine, $200. Payment due in 10 business days." They were fining me for the trash that Darlene herself had dumped on my property. The nerve of it was almost impressive. She had vandalized my property and then immediately written me a ticket for the mess she had made. It felt like being punched in the face and then getting arrested for bleeding on the person's fist that I sat on my front porch that evening, eating a microwave dinner and just staring at the pile of toxic garbage someone had dumped in my driveway. For the first time since my father passed this property to me, I wondered if I should just give up, sell the land, and move somewhere else. A place without power-hungry HOA leaders and entitled neighbors who thought their money gave them the right to ruin other people's lives. Why Dad never had to put up with this kind of craziness. He bought this land back in a time when neighbors respected each other's business. But then, I walked out to the old barn and touched my father's workbench. It was the same bench where he had taught me how to wire an outlet and fix a broken appliance. I could almost hear him say, "Son, running away just shows bullies they can win. Doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing." I thought about Linda, who had taken a risk by standing up to Darlene just to help me find justice. I thought about all the other neighbors who were likely too afraid to speak out against the HOA's bullying. I knew then that this fight wasn't just about my fence anymore. I went back to my house and looked at my security cameras, still wet with black paint. Someone had not only trespassed on my property, but had also intentionally blinded my security system to cover their tracks. That's when I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I would install new cameras, but this time, they would be hidden. If Darlene wanted to play dirty, I was going to make sure I had proof of every single move she made. "Okay, lady," I said to myself, looking toward her perfectly manicured mansion with its show-off marble columns. "If this is how you want to play, then game on." What exactly is Art's plan? Comment below and tell me who you think will win this fight. Karen with her HOA power or Art with his quiet determination? Team Karen or Team Art? The harassment got worse over the next 3 nights. Each time, it was more personal than the last night. 1. Around 2:30 a.m., I was woken up by the sound of a diesel truck in my driveway. By the time I got outside, they were gone, but they had left another load of construction garbage. This time, it was sharp metal scraps, broken tiles, and chemical containers that made my eyes water just being near them. It took me 3 hours to clean it up the next morning and cost me another $400 to have it hauled away. That same afternoon, I installed my new security system. These were military-grade night vision cameras with motion sensors that uploaded all recordings to the cloud instantly, so no one could destroy the proof. I hid them carefully in the trees and on the fence posts, where they could see everything but couldn't be easily spotted. If Darlene was going to play dirty, I was going to have a record of every move. Night 2 brought a different kind of attack. At 1:45 a.m., my hidden cameras recorded a person in dark clothes slashing both back tires of my work truck with a utility knife. Then, the same person spray-painted "Move out or else" in big, red letters across my garage door. When I found the damage at 6 a.m., I had to call for a tow truck and spend $340. I didn't have to replace the tires. I made another police report and got a case number, but Sheriff Martinez was honest with me. It's hard to prove anything without a clear witness, Art. A fuzzy video from far away in the dark won't be enough to press criminal charges. My electrical business was starting to take a serious hit. Another client called that afternoon to cancel a big rewiring job. He said he heard I was having neighbor problems and didn't want to get mixed up in any drama. In a small town, your reputation is key, and mine was being ruined on purpose by someone who had never worked an honest day in her life. Darlene was using her connections as weapons, turning my own community against me, one person at a time. But night 3 was when she finally went too far, a move that changed everything that I had been awake since midnight, expecting another attack. Then, I heard the clear sound of a chainsaw starting up near my backyard. I quickly got dressed and ran outside, but it was already too late. Darlene's landscaping crew was cutting down the 30-year-old oak tree that my father and I had planted together when I was just 8 years old. That tree was filled with every good memory I had of growing up on that land. When I was 8, my mother died in a car crash. My dad and I planted that small tree together as a living tribute to her. "Son," he had said, "this tree will be here long after we're gone. It's our family's legacy. One day, your own kids will swing from its branches." When I turned 15, he built a rope swing and hung it from the strongest branch. We spent so many summer evenings there, with him pushing me on the swing as he told me stories about my mom, her laugh, her cooking, and her dreams for our family. He taught me about patience, character, and doing what's right, even when it's hard. Standing there at 3:20 in the morning, watching strangers with chainsaws turn 30 years of memories into firewood, I felt something inside me just snap. That tree wasn't just a tree to me. It was the last real connection I had to my mother. My dad and I had planted it on the first anniversary of her death. It was just a tiny sapling then, barely up to my knee. Every year on her birthday, we'd sit under its branches, and he would tell me stories about her. After he got sick, he would spend hours on that rope swing, talking to her memory as if she were right there listening. Now, Darlene had destroyed it as if it meant nothing. As if 30 years of love and family history were just a bother to her personal grudge. This woman had no idea she had just declared war on a dead woman's memorial. For the first time since my dad's funeral 2 years before, I started to cry. Not just a few tears, but deep, shaking sobs that came from a place of grief I had kept locked away for so long. The tree came crashing down across my driveway, making a sound like thunder. It destroyed my roof gutter and smashed the very fence I had been trying to fix. It was at least $2,000 in damage, easily. But it wasn't the money that hurt. I saw the chainsaw that one of the workers had dropped in his rush to leave. For a full 30 seconds, I thought about marching over to Darlene's mansion and giving her a real reason to feel intimidated. My hands were trembling with anger. I could feel 35 years of being a reasonable person, of following the rules and turning the other cheek, all burning away into pure rage. This woman had taken my mother's memorial tree. She had vandalized my property, lied to the police, and tried to ruin my business, all because I wouldn't sell her my family's land. Every action has a price, and today she was going to learn what hers was. But then I heard my dad's voice in my head, as clear as day. Son, the moment you let anger take over, you become everything they falsely accused you of being. I put the chainsaw down and walked back to my house. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was beginning to calm down. If Darlene wanted to destroy my past, maybe it was time for me to start thinking about her future and how to make sure she didn't have one in this neighborhood. That I opened my dad's old storage trunk for the first time since he passed away. I lifted out the folders where he kept every important paper from the 40 years he owned the property. My dad was incredibly organized, labeling everything by year and topic. He kept copies of contracts and receipts that most people would have thrown out long ago. That I was searching for the original property deed, looking for any small detail that could help me in court. That's when I found something much more valuable. It was a folder labeled Easement Agreement, Hartwell Property, 2014. Inside was a 20-page contract between my father and Darlene's family. It gave them permission to run their electrical lines across our property to power their mansion. The contract was full of complicated legal words, but because of my work as an electrician, I could understand the main points. Most of it was standard legal stuff about who was responsible for maintenance and who could access the property. But there, on page 3, hidden in a long paragraph of legal terms, was a sentence that made my heart pound. It said the property owner, me, allows the electrical lines, but only if the person receiving the benefit, Darlene's family, agrees to no harassment or interference with the property owner or family members. It went on to say that breaking this rule would make the entire agreement invalid, and the property owner could end it at any time. My dad hadn't just been kind when he let the Hartwells run power lines across our land. He had been incredibly smart. He had put in a poison pill, a secret clause that would allow him, or me, to cut off their electricity the moment they caused any trouble. That I spent the rest of the night looking up easement laws online. What I found made me smile for the first time in 3 days. The harassment clause was not only legal, it was rock solid. Every attack Darlene had made, every lie she told the police, and every violation notice she sent, it was all documented. Proof that she had broken the contract. She had been so busy trying to destroy me that she had completely forgotten about the legal paper that her own power supply relied on. Around 4:30 a.m., I walked over to my kitchen window and looked across at Darlene's mansion. Every light was blazing, from the fancy crystal chandeliers in the main hall to the underwater lights in her pool. The lighting for her gardens alone probably cost more each month than most people pay in rent. I guessed her electricity bills were at least $800 a month, easily. And all of that power was coming through lines that crossed my property, under a contract she had been breaking for days. I picked up the framed picture of my father from the kitchen table. It was the one taken the day we finished building the barn together. Thanks, Dad, I whispered. You were always 3 steps ahead of everyone. Now, I could legally turn off her lights. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I had a real plan. And unlike Darlene's campaign of harassment, my plan was going to be completely, totally, and absolutely legal. How can Art legally turn off someone's power? Comment your best guess about what Art found in those papers. The first person to guess, right, will get a shout out in the next video. Day 5 began with Darlene calling an emergency HOA meeting in the grand room of her mansion. Out of 47 homeowners, 23 showed up, which was a big crowd for a meeting about immediate safety concerns. I knew this because Linda was texting me live updates from inside. Darlene had a full PowerPoint presentation ready, which she called the Community Security Crisis Threatening Our Property Values. The presentation was a masterpiece of manipulation. She showed photos of the construction debris she herself had dumped on my property, but labeled them as proof of neighborhood decay. She showed screenshots of my electrical permit requests, but called them unpermitted construction threatening community standards. She even had a pie chart that supposedly showed how property values go down in neighborhoods with hostile residents and weak HOA enforcement. She had twisted the story to make herself the victim and me the bad guy, using nothing but sneaky editing and emotional tricks. The vote wasn't even a contest. 18 members voted to give me a formal warning for breaking HOA rules and for disruptive behavior. Only 5 voted against it. Linda stood up during the meeting and tried to defend me, explaining that she had personally seen Darlene lying to the police. But she was shouted down by others who claimed she, as an immigrant, didn't understand American neighborhood values. Disgusted by the mob-like behavior and the way good people were turning on their neighbors because of fear and lies, Linda walked out halfway through the meeting. By 8 p.m. that evening, I was on the phone with Jake Morrison, my old college roommate, who was now a real estate lawyer in Austin. "Jake, I need you to look at an old easement agreement. It's complicated, but I think I found something huge." Jake had always been the smart one in our friendship. He was the kind of person who could read a long contract and instantly find the hidden traps and loopholes that everyone else would miss. When I told him the situation, his reaction was instant and excited. "Art, easements with harassment clauses are rare, but in Texas, they are absolutely rock solid. If you can prove she broke the contract, you can end the entire agreement immediately. Are you sure you want to go all in on this?" I thought about my mother's memorial tree, now in pieces and hauled away like trash. I thought about Linda, the kindest woman in the neighborhood, being yelled at by a crowd for trying to speak the truth. I thought about my dad's words, "Sometimes, son, doing the right thing isn't the easy thing." "Yeah, Jake," I said, "I'm ready to go all in." Jake explained the legal steps to me, one by one. His own excitement grew as we went over the details. "Art, in 15 years of practicing property law, I have never seen a harassment clause this strong. Your father was either incredibly lucky or incredibly smart when he made this deal. Most people just sign whatever the power company gives them. But your dad actually read the small print and added this protective rule. This clause isn't just valid, it's bulletproof. Any harassment you can prove automatically ends the entire agreement, and the courts in Texas have always supported rules like this. Darlene's own actions have handed you the legal power of a nuclear bomb. File a notice of easement termination with the county clerk because of a material breach. Make sure you include all your proof: the security camera videos, the police reports, witness statements, and papers showing the damage to your property. If the county approves it, it will happen right away and it will be final. No appeals, no delays, no do-overs. Day 6 started with an early trip to the courthouse. The county clerk, a middle-aged woman who had likely handled thousands of property arguments over the years, looked over my paperwork with a professional eye. "Sir, if the court signs off on this termination, it goes into effect immediately. The property owner will lose all rights to the easement permanently. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" I signed the papers and paid the fee. By 10 a.m., my case was officially filed. My next call was to the power company's customer service. "I need to talk about an easement termination that affects the electrical service to a neighboring property." After being transferred twice, I finally got to their legal department. A surprisingly friendly lawyer there explained their duties. "Sir, if you have a court-approved easement termination, we are legally required to shut off the service that crosses your property within 24 hours. We cannot ignore a valid legal order, even if it means a customer loses their electricity." While I was setting up my legal victory, Darlene was starting to panic. She had found out about my visit to the courthouse from the clerk's assistant, who was the cousin of one of her HOA supporters. That afternoon, she called her expensive lawyer, David Sterling, who specialized in property fights for rich clients. But what Sterling told her was not what she wanted to hear. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need to see the original easement agreement to give you proper advice. If there is a harassment clause and it's been proven that you broke its rules, it will be very difficult to get a judge to stop him." Darlene's response showed her true colors. "I haven't harassed anyone. I'm protecting my community from a dangerous neighbor. Can't you just file something to make him stop?" Sterling tried to explain the hard truth of her situation. Getting a court order to stop him requires proof of serious, unfixable harm. Losing your power because you broke a contract does not count as an emergency that needs relief. The law does not protect people from the results of their own bad actions, especially when those actions break a legally binding agreement. That evening, I decided to give Darlene one last opportunity to handle this like a grown-up. I walked over to the property line where she was working in her prize-winning rose garden, the same garden that had won 3 local awards. "Darlene," I said, my voice calm and even. "This can all be over right now. All you have to do is make a public apology for the harassment, pay to replace my tree, and fix the damage to my truck and property. Then, we can live as peaceful neighbors." Her answer told me everything I needed to know about her willingness to make things right. "I don't apologize to people who threaten my community. This is my neighborhood, and it runs by my standards. You clearly don't belong here." She actually used the word "my," as if she owned every house and every person within 10 miles. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will ruin your reputation, your business, and your future in this town." I just looked at her for a long moment. This perfectly dressed woman, standing in her $1 million garden, threatening to ruin the life of a working man whose only crime was wanting to fix his own fence. "I tried to be reasonable, Darlene. You chose your pride over peace. That's a choice you have to live with." I turned and walked back to my house, but she wasn't done yelling. "You think you can scare me?" she shouted after me. "I have connections you can't even dream of. I'll have you run out of this county." I didn't turn around. I didn't say another word. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing that her threats bothered me, but I did smile. Because by 7 p.m., I received a text message from the county clerk. "Mr. Thompson, a judge has approved your easement termination request. It will take effect at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning." My last call of the day was to Jim Rodriguez, the disconnect supervisor at the power company. "We'll need the sheriff there as a witness," he explained. "It's standard procedure for what could be a hostile situation. But sir, I have to tell you, in my 15 years on this job, this is the most satisfying, legally solid case of revenge I have ever seen." That night, I stood on my porch, looking at Darlene's mansion, lit up like a Christmas tree. Every window was glowing, every chandelier was shining, and the landscape lights made her perfect gardens look like a theme park. Tomorrow morning, all of that light would be gone. And it would stay gone until she spent tens of thousands of dollars to run new power lines around my property. "Enjoy the light show, lady," I said quietly. "Tomorrow, you're going to learn what real darkness feels like. Will Art really cut the power to a $4 million mansion?" Comment yes if you think he'll do it, or no if you think he'll change his mind. Let's see who knows Art the best. At 7 a.m. sharp on day 7. My driveway looked like a scene from a movie about justice in a small town. The power company truck showed up first, and 2 technicians, Mike and Carlos, got out with their tools and clipboards. Right behind them, Sheriff Martinez pulled up in his patrol car. He was followed by Linda, who had brought a thermos of coffee and declared she wouldn't miss this moment for the world. News had traveled fast through the neighborhood overnight. By 6:45 a.m., 8 of my neighbors were gathered around with their phones out, with some recording the whole thing for social media. Mike, the head technician, walked over to check the electrical junction box on my property. He was a man in his 40s who had the look of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, the kind of confidence that comes from 20 years of connecting and disconnecting power for people who either can't pay their bills or, in this case, don't deserve to have electricity at all. "Clean setup, sir," he said, looking at the wiring. "Very professional job. This will be a simple disconnect. No damage to the main power lines." Carlos nodded and added with a big smile, "This is the most satisfying job we've had all month." That's when Darlene made her big entrance. She came running out of her mansion at 6:45 a.m., wearing a terry cloth bathrobe. Her normally perfect hair was a mess, and she had no makeup on, showing the dark circles under her eyes. For the first time since I had met her, she looked exactly like what she was, a desperate person who was finally facing the results of her own actions. The neighbors had never seen her looking anything less than perfect, and the sight of their HOA queen looking so human and helpless was almost as shocking as what was about to happen to her power. She immediately got on her phone, dialing frantically as if her life was on the line. Her first call was to her lawyer, David Sterling, but it was 7 a.m. on a Saturday, so she only got his voicemail. Her second call was to the mayor's office, but City Hall didn't open until 8 a.m. Her third call was to her friend on the City Council, Dave Richardson, but his phone went straight to voicemail, too. It seemed that even corrupt politicians need their sleep on the weekend. Her fourth call was to her husband, Gary, who was on a business trip in Dallas. "Honey, you have to come home right now. They're cutting off our power." "What do you mean? What did I do?" she cried into the phone. "Just get home." The crowd of neighbors was getting bigger. Bob Martinez, who lived 4 houses down, showed up with his morning coffee and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "She tried to fine me $500 for parking my work truck in my own driveway. She said it violated community aesthetic standards." Sarah Williams added her own story. "She made my kids stop riding their bikes on the sidewalk because she said it was disturbing her meditation garden." Mike Foster joined in. "It's about time someone stood up to this woman. She's been bullying this neighborhood for 3 years." By 7 a.m., there were 12 neighbors standing in a half circle around the electrical box. Some were already clapping. Others were sharing their own horror stories about Darlene. A few were still recording on their phones. The whole thing felt like a community party, like a 4th of July barbecue. But instead of fireworks, we were about to see justice served with the flip of a single switch. Sheriff Martinez walked over to me as I stood by the electrical box. "Art, I have to ask you one last time. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once I give the final okay for this disconnect, there's no turning back. She will be without power until she can afford to run new lines around your property, and that is going to cost her tens of thousands of dollars." I looked across the crowd to the tree stump, where my father's oak tree, my mother's memorial, had stood for 30 years before Darlene decided it was in the way of her personal vendetta. I thought about Linda being yelled at by the HOA members for trying to tell the truth. I thought about my own business suffering because of Darlene's lies and manipulation. I thought about my father's voice saying, "Justice comes through the system, son. But when the system works, it works all the way." "Sheriff," I said, "my dad taught me that justice isn't about getting even. It's about facing consequences. This woman destroyed my mother's memorial tree, vandalized my property, lied to the police, and tried to ruin my livelihood, all because I wouldn't sell her my family's land. Every action has consequences, and today, she learns what hers are." Darlene must have heard me talking to the sheriff because she came running over, tears now streaming down her face. These were real tears, probably the first real emotion she had shown since this all began. "Art, please. We can figure something out. I'll pay for everything, double, triple. I'll replace your tree with the most beautiful landscaping you've ever seen. Just please, don't do this." I looked at her for a long, hard moment. This woman who had spent a week trying to ruin my life because I wouldn't give her what she wanted, my inheritance, just to satisfy her own selfish pride. "I offered you that chance yesterday evening, Darlene. You chose pride instead of peace. You told me I didn't belong in your neighborhood and threatened to destroy my reputation and my business. Those were your words, not mine." Her desperation was now total. All her pride was gone. "You can't do this to me. Do you have any idea who I am? I have connections all over this county. I'll make sure you never work in this town again." Even as her world was falling apart, she still couldn't stop making threats. She still couldn't stop trying to use her money and connections as weapons against someone she saw as beneath her. "Yeah, Darlene," I said quietly. "I know exactly who you are. You're the woman who just lost her power." I placed my hand on the main electrical breaker, the one that controlled the flow of electricity from the city, through my land, and to her mansion. The crowd became completely still. Even the birds seemed to go quiet. For just a second, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, I flipped the switch down. Click. The sound of that switch echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot. For 3 seconds, nothing happened, and I worried that maybe the power company had made a mistake. Then, like a line of falling dominoes, the changes swept through Darlene's mansion. First, the constant low hum of the central air conditioning unit stopped. Then, the pool pumps went silent. The landscape lighting, which had lit up her gardens, like a theme park every night for 3 years, died instantly. Inside the house, I could see the light from her crystal chandeliers flicker and go out. Her security system started to beep loudly, a warning that it was now on its emergency battery. The crowd behind me broke out in cheers and applause. But all I could hear was the wonderful sound of total silence coming from the direction of her property. After a week of being harassed, vandalized, and threatened, justice had finally had its say. The result was immediate and complete. The constant noise of her air conditioners was gone. The pool pumps were quiet. The landscape lights were dead. An 8,000 square foot mansion was now dark and silent. The only sounds were Darlene's sobbing and the happy cheers of 12 neighbors who had waited years for someone to finally stand up to the neighborhood bully. Mike, the technician, came over and shook my hand. "Sir, that was the most satisfying disconnect I've done in 15 years on this job." Carlos was smiling from ear to ear. That lady had it coming. Sheriff Martinez nodded with approval. Clean, legal, and completely deserved. Your father would be proud. The immediate cost for Darlene was huge. It would be $47,000 to run new electrical service around my property, and that was only if she could get the permits. The installation would take 8 to 12 weeks, and during that time she would need to rent a generator for $800 a week just for basic power. The Texas summer heat made the house impossible to live in without air conditioning, so she and Gary had to spend $300 a night at a hotel just to sleep comfortably. Then there was the cost of spoiled food from her refrigerators, a new security system, and the fact that her property value dropped by $200,000 because of the power problems. But the real cost was much more than money. It was the total loss of respect from her community. It was the public shame of being defeated by the working-class neighbor she had tried to ruin. It was knowing that her own actions had caused all the suffering she was now going through. This was a woman who had built her entire identity around control, status, and using her wealth and power to make others bend to her will. Seeing her neighbors cheer for her public humiliation, watching her carefully built image of authority fall apart in real time, broke something deep inside her. She sat on her front steps for 2 hours after everyone else had left, just staring at her dark house, as if she couldn't understand how her perfect life had collapsed so completely, so quickly. The HOA queen, who had terrorized an entire neighborhood with fines and threats, had been taken down by the very legal system she had tried to use against others. Her long-held power over the neighborhood had been ended by a hard-working man. With a toolbox and his father's old, smart paperwork, Gary pulled into the driveway just as the crowd was leaving. He took one look at the dark mansion and his sobbing wife and said the words that perfectly captured the whole situation. "Honey, what in the world did you do? How will Darlene survive without power in a Texas summer? Comment if you think this punishment was too much, or if you think Karen got exactly what she deserved. Also, should Art forgive her if she truly says she's sorry?" 3 weeks later, our neighborhood was a transformed place, but not in the way Darlene had hoped when she began her campaign against me. Week 1 after the power was cut was like watching the slow-motion collapse of everything Darlene had built her life around. The generator she rented cost $1,200 a week in gas, running 18 hours a day just to keep her fridge and a few lights on. The Texas summer heat made her house unbearable without AC, forcing her and Gary to spend $300 a night at the hotel downtown, just to get a comfortable night's sleep. Week 2, a for sale sign appeared on her once perfect front lawn, looking like a white flag of defeat. The real estate agent was direct with her about the problems. "Electrical issues scare off 80% of potential buyers," he told her, "and the other 20% will want a huge discount to cover the cost and trouble of fixing it." The first asking price was $150,000 below what the house was worth, and it dropped another $50,000 after a month passed with no serious buyers. Week 3 brought the final nail in the coffin for Darlene's reign of terror. Gary filed for separation, listing irreconcilable differences and financial irresponsibility due to unnecessary legal fights as the reasons. He moved into an apartment downtown, taking half of their money with him and leaving Darlene to deal with the consequences of her actions all by herself. The woman who had spent years controlling every detail of our neighborhood's looks and rules couldn't even control her own marriage. The HOA held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Darlene from all of her leadership roles. The vote was nearly unanimous, with only Darlene herself voting to stay. Linda was elected as the new president, running on a promise of helping neighbors instead of harassing them. Her first official action was to get rid of all the ridiculous and petty rules about appearances that had been used as weapons against hardworking residents who couldn't afford a mansion-sized landscaping budget or luxury cars that MY electrical business, on the other hand, took off. Word spread quickly about the guy who legally cut the power to the HOA queen. My phone started ringing with calls from people who had been waiting for years for someone to stand up to entitled homeowners and their abusive neighborhood associations. I was booked solid with work for the next 3 months, with clients coming from other counties just to hire the electrician who had beaten the system using its own rules. One warm evening, exactly 1 month after I cut Darlene's power, I was sitting on my newly fixed-up front porch with a cold beer. I was enjoying the peaceful quiet that had finally returned to our neighborhood. My own house was lit up with a warm, yellow glow from every window. I could hear a baseball game on the TV in my living room, and my dog, Moose, was sleeping happily at my feet. Linda waved to me from her kitchen window. I could see other families in their homes, going about their normal evening lives without any fear of getting a harassment letter or a violation notice from the HOA. Next door, Darlene's mansion was dark and silent. The for sale sign on her lawn had been knocked crooked by a storm last week and was never fixed. The automatic sprinkler system had stopped working without power, leaving big brown patches on her once perfect lawn. The infinity pool was covered with a tarp, and the fancy landscape lights that used to make her gardens look like a theme park were now just dead metal fixtures, collecting dust and cobwebs. I raised my beer toward my father's picture, which I could see through my living room window, and said the words that had been in my heart for weeks. Here's to good fences making good neighbors, Dad. And next time, I'm definitely reading all the fine print first. I took a long drink of my beer and smiled at the beautiful irony of it all. And as for Karen, wherever you end up next, remember to read your own fine print, too. But what happened to Darlene after she lost everything? Comment if you want to follow up. Video about what happened to Karen 6 months later. Hit that like button if you think justice was served, and subscribe for more neighbor revenge stories that will make your jaw drop.